Hello again, Mangamatt here with the October manga update. First up, let's work with a wrap-up of older series I was working on here. This is volumes 20 through 27 of Basara, which was the shoujo manga series that I was previously, the last 3 or 4 updates, been working on trying to read all of. I still maintain that this series is probably easily one of the top best shoujo manga series I think I've ever read. There's a few that I think I've heard that are also up there. Like I've heard Skip Beat is supposed to be one of the best ones, and that's even considering that it is still ongoing with like 30 plus volumes, and then I think there's maybe a few others that get talked about here and there, but Basara is one of those sort of classic, it's the way it's described is in the sense of one of those classic manga series that doesn't get ever really talked about, and that's twofold. One is because it's from the 90s. It's from that era where there was already a lot of stuff coming out at that time. A lot of now we view as classic shoujo in Sailor Moon and Inuyasha, not necessarily Inuyasha, but I mean shows like that where it's the girl that goes into the thing and then she's put into the other world. The Alice in Wonderland / Wizard of Oz scenario setup. Those shoujo series, and Basara just gets swept under the rug, and that's also probably no small part in due to the fact that now because of the success of a lot of like entitled series like Sengoku Basara, I think it's called, the one about like the two warlords that fight, the ones in the red armor, ones in the blue armor that fight, that series, and I think there's maybe a few others. Because Basara doesn't have a wholly unique title that brings it up on searches, I think that also has kind of shuffled it into that kind of obscurity. But needless to say, I still think it's amazing. The only major gripe I could give about the series is that volume 25 is the last volume of the main story, and then in what I've come to understand is the fashion of these shoujo series is that volumes 26 and 27 then become sort of a collection of these side stories and these and maybe like a couple of what if stories, like what if the characters of Basara were in high school, those kind of what if, like 10-page like kind of gag manga stories. And if I'd have known that it was only 25 volumes and the other 2 were just extra aside stories, I probably wouldn't have been as miffed about it as I was when I got to the end, because I'm like, volume 25, everything's getting wrapped up and stuff. I'm like, well, we still got 2 more to go. Where's this going? I'm on my seat, and then I get to the end. I'm like, oh, it's done. We got like two volumes left. I mean, it can't be that much epilogue wrap up, right? And then it's like, oh, it's just other stuff. And to be fair, this isn't strictly this series' fault. You can just about any shoujo series that you pick up. I think Love.com has a volume where they basically make a whole other volume just about this one story that they wrote that they just sort of shove in there to pad out one more volume. Also, Tower of the Future, which I recently read, also does that. The last volume ends like a quarter of the way in, and then the last 3/4 is just a one-off story. I think maybe Red River has that too. It's, you know, they all do that. For some reason, there's like this kind of dissonance where you can't, they for some reason can't seem to get a shoujo series to just end on a solid, complete volume. It has to be like, you know, oh, we're done, but, you know, I kind of have this little extra bit at the end. Well, let's just put one of their other stories in there and pad it out for an extra volume. Yeah. I don't know, but needless to say, you know, to judge it on its whole, I still would say that if you only get one shoujo manga series, get Basara. That, like, in terms of, like, say, Banana Fish, where I would say Banana Fish is sort of this anti-shoujo in the sense that Banana Fish is a series that was released in a magazine anthology that was aimed primarily at a female audience, that it was drawn and written by a female creator, that everything on paper, on the score sheet, says that it should be a shoujo, but with the pacing, the action, the art style, the setting, the themes, all very non-shoujo, and in that respect you could sort of say it's like a shoujo without actually being a shoujo. You know, in the same respect as how people like to say that Predator, the movie, is not a horror slasher movie because it's got macho burly men instead of little high school virgin girls. You know, but when you look on paper, yeah, Predator is by all rights a slasher movie, and, you know, Banana Fish is, but, you know, again, I'm digressing. Basara, in my opinion, takes every single kind of trope and all of the core essence, I think, of why shoujo is so good, or can be so good, is catharsis, which is the notion of the, you know, the feeling of feelings and emotions being expressed. That is to say, like, you know, when you're sad and then you cry, that the crying is catharsis. When something is funny and then you laugh as a response to that, that is catharsis. In shoujo, the melodrama is the catharsis. Like, you know, you find out early on that Sasara is in love with Shuri, and that they are on two sides of a warring faction, and that neither one of them knows that they're actually a part of the other warring faction, and that they both actually secretly despise each other to the bone, and they only through circumstance meet in some remote location, and without any of that context sort of meet each other as people, and then fall in love with each other as people, even though their rank and positions and their duties to their people make them despise each other. That is a kind of melodramatic catharsis that is kind of what you see in shoujo, and you know, maybe not in those aspects, but, like, you know, in shoujo it would be kind of the same thing, except in, like, say, high school, or it would be more romance oriented without kind of the whole political power struggle, war, military kind of thing in the mix. But you get my point. What I'm saying is that if you want to, it would be, for me, like, the best way to kind of get that feel of what you really get out of a shoujo series without having to, some people kind of don't like the whole, oh, I'm reading like sort of a Dawson's Creek, the OC teen drama angst thing. You know, in this respect, it feels like you have first of all, there's nothing wrong with angst. If a story doesn't have angst, that means that the characters don't have stakes, and therefore there's no consequences. When a high school girl is is, you know, in love with another person, and she's having this doubt about revealing those feelings because she doesn't know if she's gonna get those feelings reciprocated or she's gonna get rejected. That fear of rejection and hesitation, that is angst, and that makes us care about how that comes out. If she didn't care about that, then you wouldn't feel invested. You know, it's the same thing with Basara, except I guess it has a lot more action and a lot of these other interplays going on that I think there's more male audience members that I think would get more into it, and you know, that would be kind of a thing, you know, like the way men can kind of get into A Princess Bride, because even though it has a lot of these romantic elements in it, there's still sword fighting and there's still fun, goofy male characters that the guys can like, and it's still a fun movie in that respect. But you know, that would be kind of my pitch to Basara. And the other problem that's been with Basara is the fact that for the very longest time it's been really hard to find the print versions of them, but that's no longer an issue because they're all now available in the Kindle digital download version, so everyone can get it and enjoy it now. Alright, well, enough ranting and rambling about that. Let's rant and ramble about some other stuff, I guess. Or, well, I'm going to. You're gonna sit there and watch and listen and hopefully enjoy it. Next up is Master Keaton Volume 4, which has actually several really fun kind of little stories in here. The first story actually focusing on the Pied Piper of Hamelin. Well, it sort of in a way revolves around that. It more involves some people who survived a time in one of the Nazi concentration camps, and it turns out that somebody is now coming back around to seek and murder someone that was responsible for selling out his people to the Nazi concentration camps. This is specifically tied into the Gypsies, which Gypsies are a group of European, mostly nomadic people that kind of have their own sort of tradition and culture amongst themselves, and were also persecuted, but the persecution of the Gypsies is much less addressed in modern history, you know, following the much more serious atrocities that were committed against the Jews. You know, not saying that you know, they don't, one deserves more than the other or anything, but I'm just saying that's kind of the pattern that's kind of fallen along. But needless to say, it's a pretty interesting story in the first chapter here, talking about, you know, the history of the Gypsies, the history of the children's folk tale, the Pied Piper of Hamelin, and how you can possibly interpret the Pied Piper of Hamelin as being a story about redemption. Like, most people have seen the story of the Pied Piper as sort of this cynical jerk who gets cheated out of an honest job of ridding, you know, Hamelin of rats, and then he comes back and decides, well, if you're not going to pay me, then F you, I'm just going to take the children. And that's the end of the story without any deeper analysis to it. You know, there's lots of these little children's things that, of course, have other deeper meanings to them, and of course, you know, they go through all these revision stuff. But you know, the sort of commentary they make about the Pied Piper story is kind of fun and interesting. And again, it's part of the thing that a lot of people can really like about Master Keaton, is that, you know, it has a lot of these different angles that it can approach a story from, especially with Master Keaton being, of course, an enthusiast of archaeology and its learned professor. Then, you know, you have the next story featuring Master Keaton, who is picked up in a cab in London by a by a South African who is working in England, and he has to pull over at a stoplight because he sees that a black man is being, as he feels, unfairly judged by an act that the black man probably didn't commit. And you know, the South African cabbie wants to come out and sort of help, because apparently the black man can't speak English. He can only speak, I believe it's called Afrikaner, and so he kind of helps to diffuse the situation. And essentially it devolves into Keaton learning about this man and about a lot of the atrocities that came about in South Africa, and a lot of the prejudice and racism and lynchings that went along with that. Then you get sort of this fun little story with Master Keaton's daughter, and one particular her teacher who gets into some issues at school. I have a hard time remembering exactly what happened there, but this other interesting story where a child goes missing, and Master Keaton is brought in to kind of figure out what happened to the missing daughter, and it all involves a crazy old lady and that lives alone with her dolls, which again is already kind of odd. And then some, a lot of other little stories here and there, especially this one where Master Keaton deals with a kid who's kind of sitting by the river and kind of, doing his own little stuff. A lot of these stories you kind of learn are very kind of mellow and mundane in nature, but they have kind of this soothing kind of pace that you really get into. And of course another one, Master Keaton's dad, who investigates a man who supposedly committed suicide, and all of the tenants in the house who believe that each in their own way was responsible for the man ultimately taking his own life. And you find out precisely by the end why the one tenant wound up committing suicide, and who was ultimately responsible and why. And yeah, it's got a little bit of that mystery, a little bit of that action, military, and a little bit of that kind of archaeological history that it always keeps your brain kind of working, but it never feels like it's work. It's just kind of this fun little kind of romp stories. Let's see. Next up we get one series that I was reading on last update, but decided to wait until I finished it here. This is Jyu-Oh-Sei, which is I think called like the Planet of the Beast King, and in Japanese or something. But essentially, this is a sort of post-apocalyptic sci-fi series about a world where a bunch of these, called a chimera, where kids and teenagers are dropped on as sort of a prison planet whenever they commit some kind of crime or anything like that. A lot of prisoners are put there, and the thing about this planet is it's got an extremely hostile environment with a bunch of killer plants, and it also goes through like almost a half a year of harsh winter and weird kind of solar cycles, kind of Game of Thrones-esque, and it's just otherwise a really terrible place to be. And you have your main character Thor, who him and his twin brother Rai are sent onto this planet, and then they immediately have to try and adapt and survive here. If you're a fan of, say, like the Hunger Games or Maze Runner or those kind of thematic stories, it's very similar to that kind of way. It's not very long. It's only these three, which were originally like 5 volumes, but I guess they repackaged them like this, and it actually took the author like I think 10 years to put it all out. I will say though that the only nitpick I have about the series is like they established that there are like these tribes on the planet, and like one tribe is all women and one tribe is all men, and the women sort of have a lot more power and say in the community because it's the women who choose which men that they will, have a child with and become sort of a pair to. And, I not to be a pessimist, but I highly doubt that is how that will work in any sort of real life situation, because I'm not going to say that men are terrible human beings, but we haven't had a good track record in the greater scheme of all of mankind, and there's nothing for me to suggest that a bunch of young male adults would ascribe to that kind of a culture and hierarchy. I'll just leave it at that. That's a very optimist kind of way of viewing a young adult society. Kind of the same question I had, when I saw like the Maze Runner. It's like, how did this girl not immediately get terrible, horrible things done to her, given that this is a tribe of all boys, and they've practically never seen a girl in most of their lives, and now there is a girl, and I'm getting all kinds of terrible, terrible thoughts going on. But I will say that the sci-fi in here is pretty cool. The creatures are neat. The plant monster things are really neat. They kind of do a good job of setting up the world and how things operate. It's very easy to follow. The last arc where it gets more sci-fi is they get involved with like space travel and stuff, and you kind of learn why people are being put on this planet. I think that the twist in the ending as to why things are the way they are is much more well handled and makes more sense than some of the reasons given in the Hunger Games and Divergent and the Maze Runner series for why their scenarios are the way they are. We have to put teenagers in X because of blank scenario. Like this, I think, was the best one I've seen so far of that reasoning. Then let's see. Next we have Showa, A History of Japan, from 1953 to 1989, which, this is the last volume of the Shigeru Mizuki Showa History series, where he talks about the history of Japan in full, and also, as you can see, the time that gets jumped here is the most significant of the three. For me, reading it, it was kind of hard, I guess, because I'm not from Japan. I'm not very familiar with the events of Japan. I don't really have kind of a deep attachment to the history or anything. Again, the only time I felt really invested in it was the portion where it talked about World War II, because that's the only part that I ever really kind of learned about, because living in America, that's the only part that that us as Americans ever really, the only time that Japan as a country became a important detail and important note to find in our history. The only times they ever interacted was the World War II in that time. And of course all of this is the falling out of World War II and Japan's recovery, and of course there's a lot of stuff that gets I'm sure skipped over, because Shigeru Mizuki, he's not exactly like a PhD laureate of history. He's just going based on his own accounts and what he felt were significant to him in the history of Japan. So, in a sense, like, it shouldn't be called Showa, A History of Japan. It should be called Showa, Shigeru Mizuki's history of Japan, because of course this is all subjective. This is all how he interprets things that happened, even though they are a lot of he does draw as many facts and dates and actual accounts as he can to you know, create validity and to make sure he doesn't say the wrong thing at the wrong time or something, you know, to keep his story straight. But this is the volume, though, that you get the most insight into Shigeru's life and his personal story, because this is the part where he finally becomes a manga artist. This is the part where he becomes a family man. He sort of establishes himself in his life, and he sort of reflects on kind of the things that have happened in the story. I still highly recommend it to anybody that's a big Shigeru Mizuki fan. His art style is, you know, both a mixture of like cartoony, but at the same time he does a lot of gorgeous background illustrations. He actually uses very little screen tone. It's all kind of hand done cross-hatching and etching to create these very detailed and often very gothic sort of run down cityscapes, which add to this very kind of dreary tone to, I guess, a lot of post-war Japan. But I really love it a lot. Let's see. These last things, they're not actually anything new I got per se, because I already had these series. But one thing that I feel is always not as addressed, you know, for a manga connoisseur as myself, is of course the notion of new editions or new reprintings of older series. And a lot of times it's usually kind of a no-brainer. The new edition is usually better, but sometimes it's not always the case. First up, I got the new edition versions of Emma, which is the Victorian Romance series, which I got volumes 1 and volume 2, which comprise, I believe, volumes 1 through 4 of the smaller editions that were put out by CMX. To show you a sort of comparison in size here, here's Shirley, which I'm not entirely surely that it will be collected with the Emma series, since it's not exactly, it's just an extra story. But as you can see here, the size difference is pretty notable. So in my respect, I can see how it's worth the time to take in and, you know, reacquire the rights and do a reprinting and kind of do it up. You get much bigger size, and also it's in this gorgeous hardcover with a dust jacket. I believe there's even is there some color pages put in here? I don't think there is, but oh well, you know, it's still enough that I get a nice hardcover with the series. Oh, and actually, here's a neat little Easter egg here. The dust jacket is in fact actually reversible. This is the cover of the second volume of Emma. This is from the other series, and there's the front cover. So that's actually something pretty neat. I just found that out like right now, that the dust jacket is actually reversible. So, you know, I don't know if you're a fan of one over another. It's totally up to you, but there you go. The hardcover doesn't exactly have anything fancy to reveal itself, but again, that was kind of a neat little Easter egg right there, to find out that it's got a little reversible one if you fancy yourself one for the other. But in any respect, I highly recommend getting Emma, the Victorian Romance series, because it is actually wonderful, neat little romance series. Here's the other dust jacket for, I believe, volume 3, and then volume 4 here, as you can see. That's what it would be in the little paperback versions that CMX put out all those years ago. But I got these, one, because already the editions I had were pretty beat up and old, and secondly because I am a big sucker for hardcover dust jacket editions of manga series. You almost never find them, you never get them, and when you do, it's almost always worth it because you know they always kind of go above and beyond. Like how Yen Press did when they did the hardcover versions of Therme Rome with their series. And of course again here with Emma, where they decided to, rather than sacrifice half of those covers that Kaori Yuki did, they instead decided, well, I guess let the reader decide which dust jacket they can choose to put on their cover, you know, if you have a particular preference, or maybe you just like goofing around with your collection, you just want to change it up every so often or so. That's, you know, always up to you. But now that's an example of a really nice reprinting of an old edition done right. In hindsight, I originally got the new edition of the Astro Boy manga series because, one, the Astro Boy mangas are appallingly small, as you can see, in comparison to what would be a normal size manga edition. These are very small, especially because I'm such a big fan of Tezuka, and Astro Boy is, again, his flagship series. I would hope that they would have, when Dark Horse originally produced them in a bigger format so that you can really take in all the nice artwork that's on display. But I can see kind of the point of initially releasing them like this because it is aimed at a younger audience, and you know, kids might have an easier time picking up and reading a smaller manga series like this. Now, when they announced that they were going to re-release it in an omnibus version, I was excited because the initial look of it was going to made me think it was something along this size, where, you know, it was these are the sort of gold standard of what Dark Horse omnibuses usually look like. You know, they're big, thicker, they usually have nice gloss pages. I thought, we're fine. The ship finally came in for Astro Boy. Nope. Instead, we get this Astro Boy. You know, 3-in-1. It's thicker than a Game of Thrones volume, and again, there's been virtually no change in the dimensions and proportions of the Astro Boy prior editions. In fact, its interiors are absolutely identical to the old editions. Again, the only difference being that, you know, this is a new printing. That's it. Newer pages. It's not better pages. It's not more content. If you already have it, there is no incentive for you to want to get the newer ones. And Astro Boy is from my recollection in no short supply. You can go out and get all 23 of these little pocket-sized ones, and you'll still have money left over to pay your bills. They're absolutely dirt cheap to get. Wasn't like it was outrageously out of print and they reprinted it in the best way possible. It's like, I don't know. I would have loved to have seen Astro Boy in a nice oversized volume where I can really take in all of Tezuka's art style. I don't know if maybe it was some kind of rights thing, like they only had a PDF file of this dimension and that blowing it up would somehow reduce the quality or resolution of it or what have you. There's some kind of technical issue, but I will say that, you know, anybody that might have been on the fence about getting a new edition of Astro Boy, I would say just go ahead and get the older editions. They're just as easy to find and get than these newer ones, and you know, I never really like them when they're really thick like this because you get to the middle and it's just so hard to keep it open, and especially especially even at the beginning where you have to kind of manipulate your hand to, you can't really turn the page that well with your thumb, which is kind of how I usually do it. You have to sit there and kind of, you see how this is such a pain to kind of do. Maybe I'm maybe I'm nitpicking and I'm being a curmudgeon about it, but you know, if you're gonna give me a reprinting, at least try and kind of throw some bells and whistles on it. Like, hell, if it had been a hardcover like this and still that size, hell, I'd have told you to go and get it right now. But it's not, so I won't. But in any case, thought I'd put that out there because there's usually never anybody that comments about the comparison of newer editions versus older editions of manga volumes that get put out. So there you have it. That's all I've got to say and talk about for this month of manga. Alright, check you next time.